into radical actions of mercy. Mercy primarily for the poor, the widows, and the orphans. What he, in essence, was saying that is, if you have faith, if you call yourself a Christian, and yet your heart is not on the people who are disadvantaged, disenfranchised, marginalized, outcast, oppressed, persecuted, the poor, the widows, the orphans, if your heart and my heart doesn't melt for them, James argues, then you really start to have to question if you are a Christian and if you have a faith. And that's what we're going to look at today. If you noticed last week, if you were here, we overlapped verses. Last week we also read, what good is it, brothers, if someone says he has faith but doesn't have works? And then he gives this hypothetical situation of if a brother is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food. He says, it's no good if you just say, go, I'll pray for you. That's okay. He said, you can say, go in peace, essentially. I'll pray for you. But he says it does no good if you don't address the felt physical needs of that person. Faith, we'll see, can be dead or alive. And the question that we have to ask ourselves today, if you call yourself a Christian, or if you're thinking about this whole Christianity thing, is your faith alive and active? Or is it as dead as what the demons have? I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. I'd have to approach one thing for those who may not be as familiar with reading the Bible is this. When you read this part of James, and many people throughout history have read this section of James and they read it out of context. They've read it solely on its own. And if you read it, it sounds like what James is saying is you have to earn God's love. It sounds on the surface that James is saying you have to work to get God's love. Because he's saying, remember, he says faith apart from works is what? It's dead. It's useless. And this is why the book of James, of course, has gotten a bad rap throughout the history of the church. This is why a lot of people, a lot of prominent church fathers did not like the book of James. Because of this passage in particular that makes it sound like you and I, if we're going to earn God's love, we have to earn it, we have to work for it. It's all about how good we are and how religious and how much money we give to the poor and how we care for them. And if you take it out of context, that's what you're going to think it says. And it gets further complicated because this section of James seems on the surface to directly contradict what almost the whole other parts of the New Testament say about how you and I get saved. Specifically, if you go back to the book of Galatians chapter 2, you'll see Paul writing to the Galatians saying that it's not works that justifies you. It's not following the law. It's not following the Ten Commandments. It's not reading your Bible every day. That's not going to save you, Paul says. It's faith and faith alone, which is, of course, what we believe in this church. We believe that it is just faith alone that saves you. So then you have to ask yourself, this sounds contradictory. Well, on the one hand, Paul is saying in the book of Galatians that it's all about faith. And here it sounds like James is saying, no, it's all about your works and how good of a Christian you are and how dutiful you are, how much you give away to the poor. And you say, well, that's contradictory. I don't like it. Close the Bible, throw it away. If it's contradictory, then we got to close up shop today. No church. We're done. Close the doors. We're good. But it's not. It's not contradictory at all, because when we read this in the context of the passage today, what we'll see is that James is not calling us to be saved by works. Rather, he's saying, your works will show what your faith is in. Everybody's got faith. Even the demons will see that he talks about. Even the demons in hell, they have faith in something. I gave an example last week of the apple tree. It's a very simplistic, perhaps too simplistic of an example, but the apple tree, I said if you look at the apple, you know that the apple is not the source of life for that tree. But it's the evidence of life of that tree. In the Christian world, we call this bearing fruit. It means that if you believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior, it will fundamentally start to change your life and the way you live your life, the way you spend your money, the people you bring into your inner circles, the people you associate, the way you serve. It'll change everything radically. It'll be the fruit on the outside of the tree. And James is saying to the Christians, mind you, that's who he's writing to, the ones inside the church. And he's saying, wait a second, people. You say you have faith. Good. So what? What does it do? Has it helped you? Has it helped anybody else? If it hasn't, then you really need to question if your faith has life to it. So before I move on, I wanted to address that. It seems contradictory of what James is saying to what Paul and pretty much the rest of the Bible says. It seems to be saying that here he's saying you have to earn God's love, and that's not at all what he's saying. Rather, he's saying if you've already gotten God's love, you won't be able to help showing it. Philip Melanchthon wrote, he says it this way, it's saved by faith alone, but not by a faith that remains alone. He said, we as Christians, we're saved by faith alone, but it's not a faith that stays alone. It's a faith that moves. It's a faith that moves into action. It's a living faith. So the question today is this. Call yourself a Christian, ask yourself this, is my faith living? What do you even mean by that? What does James mean by that? Let's look at this text. Follow along in your outline if you can. And I want to contrast what he does in terms of a living faith and a dead faith. Or what I'm terming it is that a life that fears or a faith that lives. And this is what we have to ask ourselves as a Christian community. Is our faith alive? Has it made one iota of difference in anybody's life? First, a life that fears. What do I mean by that? Look back at your passage and he says, listen, people, you believe. Good. Even the demons do. You see how scary this is? Unpack this for a little bit. He says, you believe. What he's saying is, you know God. Good. So do they. What the implication of this is that you and I could have all the right knowledge of God, and we'd be no better off than demons, James argues. He's saying you can have the best doctrine. You see this? You can have the best doctrine, the most sound biblical doctrine, and yet you're no better than them. Your faith's not alive. Think about it this way. The demons that we believe in, they knew Jesus. There's a part in Matthew, remember, when the demoniacs run to Jesus and they're wanting help. They want Jesus to help them get the demons out. And the demons go to Jesus and they say, what have you to do with us, O Son of God? Isn't that interesting? Even demons know God. And I'll guarantee you that they know him better than you and me. They've known him for a lot longer. They've been to the greatest seminary. They have all the right beliefs about God. And yet James says you can have all the sound beliefs, all the greatest doctrine, you can have all the greatest Bible knowledge in the world, and yet, your faith's not alive. It's dead. It's useless, he would argue. But here's where it gets even cooler. If you notice what he says next, he says, even the demons believe, and he says, and they shudder. They have fear of God. You see, you can have all the right knowledge of God, and he can even strike fear in your heart, and you'll never know him. This is crazy. If you call yourself a Christian, you have to start going, wait a second, whoa. Pastor's saying, I'm not saying, James is saying, you can have all the right doctrine and belief systems and biblical knowledge, and yet you're no closer to God than the demons are. And he says, even you can have fear, and you're no closer than they are because they have fear. They shudder. But let me explain what he means by this fear thing. This word that he uses for shudder, or in some of your translations is just tremble, it's the only time it's used in the New Testament. And James does not use this word lightly. He says, you believe, so do they. Even they shudder at the very name of God. They know him, they know how powerful he is, and he causes a reaction of fear. They're motivated by fear, the demons are. Let me unpack this for you for a second. This word that he uses for shudder, meaning that they're afraid, it's, like I said, only used here one time. And it's not the same word that's used for fear in any other part of the Bible. Go back to Old Testament or New Testament. Every time somebody says they have a fear of the Lord, in Greek it's the word phobos, where we get, of course, our word phobia. To be afraid. And psychologists will know, if you read in some, one day I'm going to have a psychologist walk in here and I'm going to use this illustration, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. But I've read some of the journals, and this is what psychologists tend to say about phobias. They tend to say phobias are an inordinate fear based upon an inordinate amount of respect for a given thing. Let me explain. See, a phobia is nothing more than an inordinate fear based upon an inordinate respect. I'm afraid of heights. I'm greatly afraid of heights. Does anybody know what the phobia for that one is? Small, you can shout it out. Come on, guys, participatory. Acrophobia. I'm an acrophobic. I have an inordinate fear of heights that whenever I'm driving on a bridge, I go to the middle lane. It freaks me out to get too close to the side. Planes used to be a problem for me. Now, I have an inordinate fear of heights because I have an inordinate respect of heights. I respect heights very, very much. I respect tall things, and when I fall off of them, how things might go wrong for me. So I have an inordinate respect for bridges and ladders and high places and things that go up in the sky. Why? I have a phobia. It's an inordinate fear based upon an inordinate respect. So consequently, I try to conquer my phobia. How do I do that? I go skydiving, or went skydiving. I get up in the airplane. I'm up there, well above New Jersey at the time, looking at the skyline of New York City, and I say, here's how I'm going to conquer my phobia. What does that mean? Conquering your phobia means showing that thing less respect than it deserves. So I said, heights, I will no longer inordinately respect you. I will jump out of this airplane, and I did. It was fun. Nerve-wracking, scary, but fun. And on the way down, coasting, and the parachute opens up, and the instructor's on my back, and we're tied together. I said, I conquered my phobia. I no longer have an inordinate respect for this thing, which is going to cause an inordinate fear. Until my instructor loosened the chains that were connecting us. He thought he was being funny and loosened it up to make me think I was falling for a split second, and he laughed the whole way down. I got my phobia back after that point. So he didn't help me. He undid the conquering of my phobia. But the point is this: phobia, fear, the fear that's talked about in the Bible, when Christians fear God, it's awe, it's reverence, it's respect. See, a bad phobia, my phobia of heights, is an inordinate respect that causes an inordinate fear. But the phobos that's in the Bible fear that we're called to, is awe, wonder, reverence, respect. And James is saying that's not what the demons have. They're afraid of God, but not out of respect, not out of reverence. They have an inordinate fear that causes them to shudder. And James is saying the whole Christian church, everybody, all of us, can know everything about God through the Bible. We can have all the head knowledge. We can have all the right doctrine. We can even be moved by fear. And yet, he says, your faith is no better than the demons, because that's what they do. They're motivated primarily out of a fear that shudders them. Push this out into your life. Here's a practical implication before I go forward. If you and I ask ourselves honestly, do we fear God out of respect, or do we fear God and he makes us shudder? Do you fear God with the phobos fear, the reverent fear, the awe fear, the awesome and wonder of it? Or are you motivated primarily by fear, guilt, and shame? James would say if the latter, if the second one, then he says your faith is no different, no better than those demons, because that's what motivates them. Duty, obligation, fear. So what James is saying in the Christian life, you can either have a living faith or a life of fear. You're going to be motivated. All of us are. Let's ask ourselves honestly. What do you fear? What makes you shudder? Is it the fear of failure? Which is why we all cover up so much, to look polished to everyone else, to achieve. Is it the fear of shame? This is why we lie to each other, because we're covering. We don't want to be exposed. Fundamentally, the human heart is going to be motivated by some fear. And if it's a fear of failure, it's a fear of shame, it's a fear, even it's a fear of duty or obligation to live up to the expectations that you think God has for you, you will be no better, James says, than the demons. And your faith is dead. You're shuddering, not wondering. You're trembling, not looking at him in awe and wonder. Now, nothing's wrong with having fear of God. That's in the Bible. But I just talked about what kind of fear. Let me put it this way. I have children. I need to motivate them to do things. Brush their teeth. Go to bed. What good, I ask you, is it if I only use the shuddering fear as motivation for them? Do they grow? Do they learn? No. They just tremble. And I'm unfortunately, I make them tremble too many times. I'm quite sure when I raise my voice. And they tremble and they shudder. But listen, I can use fear as a motivation tactic for children. Do you want that to be your motivation for living out your faith? The fear of other people finding out about you. The fear of God looking into your life and telling you how you really are. The fear of not living up to expectations. The fear of failure. The fear of being found out. James would argue, if that's your motivating factor in life, if you can wake up in the morning and say, this thing makes me shudder, whatever it is, my job, people, the hold my family has on me, the need for respect that I want from everybody, it makes me shudder if I don't have it. James would argue, then you are no better, O ye Christians, than the demons. They know God, and he makes them tremble. But he doesn't give them phobos. He doesn't give them awe and wonder and majesty. Now, if I scared you a little bit, did a lot of time there talking about demons and comparing the Christian community to demons, but that's what James does. He's being pretty harsh. And he's saying, if you know God and if you fear him, it doesn't matter. You need something different. You need to ask yourself, do you have a living faith? And here's the way that he does it. So what's a living faith? That's a life of fear. Choose to live like that and you'll live just like the demons. You'll be shuddering and trembling your entire life. But he presents a different alternative. And he gives us a wonderful example of it in Abraham. A story. But here's his main premise. And he says this, if you look at verse 14. The evidence that if you and I have a living faith and we call ourselves Christians and our faith is alive and kicking and in action, he says, you will then go out to the poor. You'll meet their needs. You'll meet the needs of the widows, the orphans, whoever it is, the refugees, the people who cannot help themselves, James says. He says, if your faith is alive, you will not be able to not be melted by the cause of the needy. But if your faith is dead, you only know things here and shudder in here. You have head knowledge and heart fear. But that's not a living faith, James argues. How do you know? Well, he gives this wonderful example, and I'll tell the story for those of you who don't know the story, of Abraham. And here he says something interesting. He says, God called him a friend. And that sounds a little odd, and a lot of people have a hard time with this idea that God's my friend. You know, you see the shirts, at least in America, Jesus is my homeboy. And I don't know if he's your homeboy, but God is your friend. And a lot of people have a hard time understanding that. Wait a second, I know God's my king. I know God's my Lord. I know he's my Savior, but my friend? What does that even mean? And James would argue that until you know what it meant for Abraham to be called the friend of God, you'll never know the power and the beauty and the majesty of being a friend to God and how it will change you forever. Let me explain. Abraham, if you've read your Bible and you read the story in Genesis, most of you know it. Here's a quick recap. Abraham, God comes to him and says, I'm going to give you ancestors that you can't even count. You're going to be the father of this whole nation. He gives him one of the grandest promises in all of human history. And of course, at the time, Abraham doesn't have a son, and his wife Sarah is very old. And he says, God, how do I know? And God says, I promise it. He makes a covenant with him. Later on, after the whole Ishmael debacle, he gets Isaac, his son. After countless years and struggle to have a baby, Abraham finally gets it. He gets the promised child. If you've tried to get pregnant in your life, or maybe you've had friends who have tried to get pregnant, and when they have miscarriages and it takes a long time, you know the toll that it takes on them. And you know, if not for your own life, you've seen it maybe in others of your friends who've had a hard time getting pregnant, had a hard time conceiving and getting children. And when they do finally get the child, do you know how their life has changed? How special and precious that child is because of how much they had to struggle to get to that child. Now, think about Abraham. Abraham waited years and decades, and finally he gets Isaac. And what does God do? He says, I want you to take Isaac and go sacrifice him. What? It's ridiculous. If you're Abraham, you're like, come on. I've waited for so long. Now I got it. This is my prized jewel. This is going to be my name. My legacy will live on through Isaac. And you want me to go what? And on the surface, if you read that story, you start to say, well, this is a cruel God. This is a God who wants him to go kill his only son, the son that he promised to him. What's going on? You notice God doesn't say to Abraham in the story, if you remember, and you look back in the book of Genesis, you'll read the story. He doesn't say, Abraham, go murder your son. He doesn't say, Abraham, go kill your son. He doesn't go say, Abraham, go sneak in the middle of the night and cut him up. That would be brutal. That would be malicious and vicious. What God does is he looks at Abraham, essentially. And essentially, he says this, the thing that you hold more dear than me, I want you to get rid of it. See, Abraham would have coveted Isaac. Finally, the fulfillment has come for Abraham. Finally, he's got the son he's always wanted. Finally, he's got the fulfillment of the promise. Isaac to Abraham represented the future, life, promises, joy, hope. And I guarantee you that Isaac, being the son, had crept into Abraham's heart as his new idol. And God essentially says this, take the thing that will keep you from having a true relationship with me and get rid of it. Sacrifice it to me, God says. Not kill it. Take it up the mountain. Take your son there. Build an altar. Put the thing that you make more important in your life than me and get rid of it. And of course, Abraham goes and tries to do that. Now, you know, most of you know how the story ends. The angel of the Lord comes down and says, no, stop. Now I see. What is the angel of the Lord essentially saying? Essentially saying, now, Abraham, I know you hold nothing more important than God. You're willing to sacrifice the very thing that has become your centerpiece, your hope, where you find rest, where you find your identity, where you find your value. And the angel of the Lord basically says, don't do it. I got it. I know now. And James says, because of that story that I just told you, God calls Abraham a friend. A friend. You see what this means? It means primarily in your life and my life, brothers and sisters, that God does not want rules to be followed primarily. He wants a relationship with you to be lived out. He wants to call you a friend. But the only way that you can get into true friendship with God is if you're willing to and able to take the thing that's whatever it is, the Isaac of your life, the idol, the center place, and say, I'm not going to just think about God. The demons do that. I'm not just going to shudder and obey him out of duty, obligation. I'm not going to just try to be a moral person and earn it. I'm going to sacrifice it so that I can be a friend to him again. And here's the cool thing about friendships. If you've ever had a really good friend, think about your life. If you've ever had a really good friend, your bestie, your BFF, You know what's so special about a friendship? You live for nothing but that friendship. You call that person up and you say, hey, what are you doing? And they say nothing. And they say, what are you doing? You say nothing. Let's hang out. Okay, what do you want to do? I don't know. Let's just get together. I'm going to a movie. I don't care. It doesn't care what, you don't care what you're doing. You care who you're doing it with. I told this story a couple times. Most of you guys know, before Korea, we lived in China with my wife and I. We lived in a big, big, sprawling city down in the south of China. Huge city. And if you've ever lived in China or had experience with China, sorry China, but it's not an easy place for an expat foreigner to thrive, to get along. Linguistically, culturally, socially, emotionally, psychologically. It's a challenging environment. You need friends. And I was lucky enough that I had a good friend. I have my best friend, who's my wife, but I had a really good friend, a guy. He was a fellow husband. He had children close in age to mine. But the beauty of that friendship, when I look back on it, is we spent countless hours doing absolutely nothing. He'd call me up and say, what are you doing? And I'd say, nothing. What are you doing? Oh, nothing. Okay, let's get together. We'd walk the city for hours on end, just talking. I had no demands on him in the friendship. He had none on me other than just, where do you want to meet? You see now, when God says, Abraham was my friend, because he was able to relinquish control of the very thing that would control him and dominate him, his love and affection and doting for his son. He was able to get that out of his heart and put me back in the middle. And James says, if you and I do the same, if you and I look at God and say, yeah, you are my friend, and I want nothing but your smile. I demand nothing of you, and he demands nothing back of you in return, except your love, your companionship, your friendship. Friends just live for the smile of the other friend. Friends live for relationship. Friends don't shudder at one another. And friends don't claim to just know everything. They have a living faith that works itself out. Now, before I close, the question you have to ask yourself is this: how? What I've just painted to you is this: you can choose to live a life operated by fear. The demons do, and they shudder. You could be motivated by the fear of failure, the fear of the need of success, the fear of the lack of respect, the fear of loneliness. All those fears will make you shudder. But a living faith in your friend will make you come alive. So then you say, how do I get rid of the fear? I don't want to live in fear anymore, and I know many of you do. I don't want to live in the fear of having to live up to expectations of others around me. I don't want to live in the fear of failure. I don't want that fear anymore. How do I get rid of it? How do I drive out that fear? Is it courage? No. The Bible doesn't say courage drives away fear. What does it say? 1 John chapter 4, it says that perfect what? Love. Perfect love cast out fear. I'm not standing here this morning and telling you that if you lived your life in fear up to this moment, that just take courage, be strong, grind it out. No, the opposite in the Bible. The opposite of fear is not courage; it's love. And the Bible would say this: the gospel says you and I need to get back into touch with the greatest love story that ever happened, the greatest love that was ever shown in all of the human history, and it was shown for you. Because Jesus says this in the book of John. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one life for one's friends. Friends. Jesus says, it's my life, and I'll lay it down for you, friend. So fear will no longer grip you and guide you. You will no longer shudder or pretend to know it all. You'll be melted. Your heart, if perfect love has cast out all fear, then what you're filled with is perfect love, and therefore you're going to start to look at the people around you in need of that love, and you're going to want to start to pour it on them. See, now you know why to serve the orphans and the widows and the poor. I could sit here and tell you, serve the orphan, serve the widow, serve the poor, and that's fear motivating you. I want love to motivate you. James does too. Greater love has no one than this, that they lay down one's life for one's friend. Listen, that story that I told you about Abraham, that's a good story. It's a powerful story. Someone takes a young man and leads him up the mountain, and that young man is going to be sacrificed. But he's not. And in the end of that story, if you've read it, or if you haven't, here's the end. God says, don't kill Isaac, and he gives him a goat. He gives him a lamb. See, God is saying something's going to have to be sacrificed here. Someone's going to have to lose. Some cost is going to have to get paid down to get you and me out of the place of living our life motivated by fear, shuddering, scared, trembling. And God says, put your son on the altar, now take him off. Put my son there. That story of Abraham and Isaac only points to another story, when another man would be led up a mountain outside the city and put on a cross and torn, ripped. When Jesus hung on the cross, the angel of the Lord didn't come down and say, stay thy hand. No. Silence came down. When Isaac got put on the altar, the very thing that needed to be sacrificed and cut out like a surgeon from Abraham's heart, the very thing that he was probably putting on a pedestal above that of God, showing more devotion to, maybe, probably, because he had cherished and wanted the son for so long. God says, put it on the altar, now take it off, now put my son there. He's the sacrifice you need. That's perfect love. Brothers and sisters, this morning, sink your teeth into that. You want to get rid of fear? You want to stop living your life shuddering? Every time you get disrespected, every time you fail, every time you lose, that you shudder and you fear and you weep. James says, do that. Your faith is useless. It's no better than the demons. But he says, look, here's a living faith. If you simply come to him as a friend. Greater love has none than this, that one would lay down his life for his friends. And sometime later, Jesus would say, I give my life. No one takes it from me. I give it up for you. Meditating on that in the Christian community, meditating on that in your Christian heart, see, gives you a living faith, not a life of fear. It makes you start to be ravished by the God who is ravished with you. And then you cannot help, you will not be able to help, but to turn and to look to those who are in need, the poor, the widows, the orphans, the refugees, the lonely people, the outcast, the saddened, the tragic. And you'll say, he put his son in my place. And he put his son in your place. Now let me serve you. Let me love you, you would say to the poor. Let me clothe you as I was loved and as I was clothed by my friend. This morning, James says, basically saying, he doesn't want anything from you but your friendship. But when you become a friend of God, you cannot help but then go do things for it and show the beauty of that friendship. Meditate on that perfect love this morning. Meditate on that and that alone. Fear will start to go away. It has no room in a heart that's filled with this kind of love. And if you know Jesus did this for you, then this table today is for you, this meal. What we're going to do is take the Lord's Supper. We're going to read